We've had 2 solid weeks of conflicts. We've had 2 solid weeks of the stock market drifting lower. We now have oil about $100 a barrel. That is a very high number, especially when we were in the 50s just a little bit ago. The market is resilient, not because the market doesn't care about conflict or death or destruction. I think it's resilient because it's waiting to see how it's all going to turn out. Good morning. Welcome to Life in the Markets. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2026, and we have an interesting discussion for you today. We have now completed 2 solid weeks of conflict with Iran, and we have seen a marked increase in volatility, and yet the markets are actually holding up remarkably resiliently. So let's take a look at the last 5 days within the market. The thing I'd like you to know is that the S&P was down. It was another negative week. It was a negative week last week, a negative week this week. We were down a little bit more than 1.5%. The equal weighted S&P was down a little bit more, about 2.3%, 2.29%. NASDAQ was down just over 1%. Russell down almost 2%, 1.9%. International stocks down about 2%. Gold down about 3%. Silver down around 4.5%, 4.47. Oil was up about 9%. And cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, was up around 4.37%. Bonds were down. So the regular ag bond, the generic corporate bond here in America, down almost 1%. That's a fairly meaningful move this week. We see that the high yield bonds, the higher risk bonds, the things that are a little bit more, less secure, shall we say, was down less than that. It was only down 0.6%. I think that's a particularly interesting point. I may come back to that here before the end of our video. And just a note, our 10-year Treasury is now at 4.287%. That's not a major number in and of itself, but it's a 3% increase on the on the week, which is fairly substantial. Let's put all of this in perspective. We've had 2 solid weeks of conflicts. We've had 2 solid weeks of the stock market drifting lower. We've had an incredible amount of concern. We now have oil about $100 a barrel. In fact, when I checked on Saturday, oil was trading at $99.30 a barrel. That is a very high number, especially when we were in the 50s just a little bit ago. If you think about the price of oil, since the beginning of the conflict, we're backing the clock up to the end of February, before missiles started flying, oil has increased 47%. And if we look at the entirety of the year, oil actually is up 71% for this entire year, 2026. So you would think with now conflict in the Middle East, with Israel and the United States attacking Iran, you would think the stock market would be really unsettled, very unstable. With oil prices as high, we would think that the market would also be very shocked, or we would be facing significant market downturns. The reality is, to date, the market's been enormously resilient. The market recognizes that we are seeing an elevation in oil, but I think they're also recognizing the fact that oil is elevated for 2 primary reasons, right? The first primary reason is there is conflict in the Middle East that does disrupt oil production. The second and more meaningful impact is what's happening within that Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is that strip of water between the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and Iran, right? It's a very narrow area, and Iran has threatened to mine that particular area. They've threatened to fly drones into oil ships. They are trying to hold the entire global economy hostage until the war comes to an end, or they get a better negotiating position to be able to get their way in this conflict. I think what they're trying to do is create economic pressure on the United States and the rest of the world so that people, nations, individuals will be placing pressure on the administration to step back, to slow down, and to de-escalate some of the tensions that are impacting the Middle East. Okay. But the stock market is not down that much. If we think about a year-to-date basis, let's just take a look at the same numbers that we looked at on a year-to-date basis. The S&P 500, it's down 3.8%. Like, not a major sell-off. In fact, if we just look at since the beginning of the Iran conflict, it's only down 3.59%. That's not massive. We see the equal weight is still positive for the year, barely, but it's still positive. It's positive by about 0.19%. It's down about 5.5% since the Iran conflict started, but we're still positive year to date. NASDAQ was down about 4.26% since the beginning of the year, down about 2.3% since the conflict began. And I can go on. All of the various indices have basically kind of shrugged this off. The international indice is down perhaps more than some of the others. It's down 8.66% since the Iran conflict began. That's kind of to be expected. In fact, international markets on a year-to-date basis are now essentially flat. They're down ever so slightly. We're looking at a very resilient market. The market is resilient, not because the market doesn't care about conflict or death or destruction. I think it's resilient because it's waiting to see how it's all going to turn out. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater is really what the market and traders tend to do best. And for one reason or another, they're sitting tight and they're waiting for more information. Oil is elevated, but oil is only going to be a factor if this conflict drags out for weeks and months on end. If we have oil elevated above $100 a barrel for several months, that will have a marked increase in inflation. That will have a marked increase on the consumer's behaviors and spending habits. We will travel less. The cost of gasoline will go up. The cost of air travel will go up. The cost of food will go up. The cost of electronics will go up. All of the normal inputs that go into the products and the services that we purchase will be affected by a longer-term elevated oil price. The one thing that we know about Donald Trump is that he cares very, very deeply about what happens with the economy, what happens with the stock market prices. And he kind of feels in some ways that the stock market is a proxy on his own performance as a president and as a leader. I believe that at some point we will see a de-escalation of the conflict. We will see the Strait of Hormuz reopened and oil will start flowing. Oil prices will go down and everything will be fine. The Strategic Oil Reserve, that last week they approved the release of so many millions of barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Reserve. Number one, not a really big fan of that. I don't think that we need to be releasing our strategic reserves at this point for such a temporary issue. I understand politically that the administration feels that they need to do this to show that they're at least trying to deal with the impact on gasoline prices. We're going to have to wait and see on this. I'm not a big fan. If oil stays elevated for a long period of time, this temporary release of the strategic reserve is not going to be enough to really keep the prices low. So, I'm not really too excited about this move because it's a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. I'd rather we address the bigger problem. The bigger problem is the conflict. The conflict does need to end. We don't need to be nation building. We don't need to be putting boots on the ground in Iran. I certainly hope we don't do that. At the same time, I really want Iran to not have the kind of government it has right now. I want them to not have access to nuclear weapons. I want them to not have an ambition to destroy Israel and America. And I would argue that it is absolutely in America's best interest to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have seen already this year Maduro in Venezuela out. We've seen now the Ayatollah in Iran out, gone, dead. We're now seeing interesting bubbling over in other places like Cuba. What an interesting legacy for President Trump if after the first year or two of his presidency, we don't have any more hardline communist countries in our backyard or major Islamic organizations that are trying to destroy America. Again, maybe I'm very optimistic that all of these things will turn out in a positive way. They could equally turn out in a less positive way. This would be a really remarkable legacy if it comes to place or comes to pass. All right. So boiling all this down, market volatility is a factor. We're not going to see market volatility go away until this conflict is resolved. When I say market volatility, what I mean is that we could have the stock market open down very hard and by the end of the day open up very high. Or conversely, we could have the stock market open up very high and by the end of the day, the stock market closes very low. We have a whole lot of intraday movement. And I would even say we have seen in the last couple of weeks several times where the markets either opened down or opened up and then closed just simply flat. It seems like we've had a lot of movement. We've seen like we've had a lot of risk, but the markets at the end of the day haven't moved that much. So what are we to make of this as investors? As an investor, there's almost nothing to make of this. I don't believe that any of this conflict in Iran is going to have an impact to your long-term financial plans. I have individuals that I'm talking to about retirement and should I put my retirement plans on hold because of this conflict, because of oil, because of the stock market. I don't want to be pulling out of a down market. And my response is, you're right. I don't want you pulling out of a down market, but there are strategies that we can employ to help lessen the impact, especially if we believe, as I do, that this is a temporary issue, that it's only down while there's uncertainty, but more certainty will come. We'll know when the Strait of Hormuz will open up, what oil is going to do. We'll know what we're dealing with when we have a new regime in Iran. We'll know how much of a conflict it's going to be when, the conflict has come to an end. So be patient. Don't make changes to your long-term plans. Sit tight. We want to revisit risk. If all of this has gotten you more aware of risk, now would be a really good time to sit down with your advisor and look at what you're doing and make sure that your risk level is right for the kind of growth you want to achieve, but also the kind of protection you want within your portfolio, the insulation to some of these shocks. So talk to your team, reach out and talk to us. If you're not a client, I would encourage you to reach out to us and schedule a stewardship review for us to help you figure out what to do with the resources that the Lord has entrusted to you. This is what we're here for. The Life Financial Group exists to help Christians become even better stewards of all of their assets. We do not control the stock market. We do not control what happens with war and Iran and all of that. But what we can do is help you know what it looks like to be a good steward of the resources that have been entrusted to you. So reach out to us. There is a link here on the show notes or in the video directly for you to schedule your free stewardship review. As we close today, I just want to point out a verse that I think is very relevant for those who might be feeling anxious. It's from Philippians 4, 6, and 7. I know you already know these verses by heart, but let me remind you of them. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and minds in Christ Jesus. That's a lesson that we need to take to heart. No matter what's happening in your life, if it's the stock market that's getting you worried, or your health, or your family, or your financial situation that's getting worried, cast your anxieties on the Lord. Trust in the Lord. Remember to go to Him with prayers, supplications, and with thanksgiving. He has done so much good for us. Give Him praise, trust in Him, and that peace that passes your ability to understand why you feel the way you do in spite of all of the uncertainty going on in life. That will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. Until next week, take care, God bless, and be safe in the markets.
The topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investing and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. All information herein is from sources believed reliable, but is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. The team assumes no liability for any errors, omissions, or actions taken based on this material. Information is as of the date stated and subject to change without notice. Securities and advisory services offered through Genius Wealth Management. Member FINRA and SIPC.